What if I told you that Florence Scovel Shinn discovered a secret formula nearly 100 years ago that could multiply your money in just 24 hours? A formula so powerful that her students went from poverty to abundance overnight, yet so simple that anyone can use it right now. Before we dive into this life-changing secret, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'm about to reveal the exact words, the precise method, and the hidden techniques that the wealthy have been using for decades. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming at the end of this video. It will blow your mind. Here's something that will shock you. In 1925, when Florence Scovel Shinn published The Game of Life and How to Play It, she included a money formula that was so effective, publishers tried to suppress it. Why? Because if everyone knew this secret, the entire financial system would change overnight. But Florence didn't care about the establishment. She cared about helping people break free from poverty consciousness and step into their divine inheritance. Let me tell you about Sarah, one of Florence's students who was 3 days away from eviction. She had exactly $7 to her name, no job prospects, and creditors knocking at her door. Florence gave her this exact formula I'm about to share with you. Sarah spoke these words with conviction for just 24 hours. The next morning, she received a call from a lawyer informing her that a distant relative had left her $15,000 in their will money she never knew existed. Coincidence? I don't think so. Florence Scovel Shinn wasn't just another self-help guru. She was a metaphysical pioneer who understood the scientific principles behind manifestation decades before quantum physics proved her right. Her students included some of the wealthiest people of her time, and her methods have been quietly used by millionaires and billionaires for generations. What I'm about to share with you isn't theory. It's a proven system that has created more wealth than any investment strategy or business model. But here's where it gets really interesting. Florence discovered that most people fail at money manifestation because they're using the wrong words. They're actually repelling money without realizing it. Every time you say, "I need money," or "I want money," you're telling the universe that you lack money. And the universe, being the perfect mirror it is, gives you more lack. But when you use Florence's secret formula, you bypass this trap completely. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there are 3 fundamental laws governing money manifestation. First, the law of divine supply, which states that God is your unfailing source of abundance. Second, the law of spoken word. Your words have creative power and literally shape your reality. Third, the law of non-resistance. You must allow money to flow to you without struggle or force. Now, let me break down the exact formula that Florence gave to her most successful students. This isn't just an affirmation, it's a divine decree that activates invisible forces in your favor. The formula has 3 parts, and you must speak them in this exact order. Part 1. Infinite Spirit, open the way for large sums of money to come to me now, under grace and in perfect ways. Part 2. I am a perfect channel for divine supply, and money flows to me freely and endlessly. Part 3. My words are charged with faith and substance, and what I decree is established now. Wait, before you try this, there's something crucial you need to know. Florence discovered that 90% of people who use this formula fail because they make one critical mistake. They speak the words, but they don't prepare their consciousness to receive. It's like trying to pour water into a cup that's turned upside down. The water bounces right off. Florence taught that you must first cleanse your consciousness of poverty thoughts. Every belief that says, money is hard to get, or rich people are greedy, or I don't deserve wealth, acts like a wall blocking your abundance. Here's the simple process Florence used. Step 1. For the next 24 hours, refuse to speak any words of lack, limitation, or financial struggle. Not one word. Step 2. Every time a poverty thought enters your mind, Immediately replace it with, God is my unfailing supply, and I am rich in every good thing. Step 3. Before speaking the formula, spend 5 minutes visualizing yourself as already wealthy. See the money in your bank account, feel the relief and joy, experience the freedom that wealth brings. Now here's something that will amaze you. Florence discovered that the universe responds faster to spoken words than written words. Why? Because when you speak, you activate the vibration of your voice, which creates sound waves that literally reshape the energy around you. Your voice is your magic wand, and every word you speak is casting a spell. Florence taught that there are optimal times to speak this formula for maximum effectiveness. The most powerful time is immediately upon waking, when your subconscious mind is most receptive. The second most powerful time is just before sleep, when your words will work in your subconscious all night long. But if you want to accelerate the process, speak the formula every hour on the hour for 24 hours straight. One of Florence's students, a businessman named Robert, was facing bankruptcy. He had lost his company. His house was in foreclosure, and his wife was threatening to leave him. Florence gave him this exact timing protocol. Robert spoke the formula every hour for 24 hours. On the 25th hour, he received a phone call from an investor who had seen his old business plan and wanted to fund a new venture with a $100,000 investment. Today, that company is worth millions. But here's what the experts don't want you to know. The real secret isn't just in the words or the timing, it's in the feeling. Florence discovered that the universe responds to the emotional vibration behind your words more than the words themselves. When you speak the formula, you must feel as though you've already received the money. You must embody the consciousness of wealth. Florence developed a specific technique for generating the feeling of wealth. She called it living from the end. Here's how it works. Before speaking the formula, close your eyes and imagine it's exactly 1 year from today. You're looking back at this moment as the turning point when everything changed. You're surrounded by abundance, your bank account is overflowing. Your business is thriving, you're living in your dream home. From that place of fulfilled desire, speak the formula as a statement of gratitude for what has already been accomplished. This technique tricks your subconscious mind into believing the wealth has already manifested, which eliminates doubt and resistance, the two biggest blocks to financial abundance. Your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. So when you consistently imagine wealth as already yours, your subconscious accepts this as reality and begins attracting the people, opportunities, and circumstances needed to make it manifest. Now, let me share something that might disturb you. Florence discovered that most wealthy people unconsciously use these principles, but they've been taught to keep the methods secret. Why? Because scarcity creates control. If everyone knew how easy it is to manifest money, the power structures that depend on financial inequality would crumble. Let me tell you about 3 more of Florence's students who used this exact method. Margaret was a single mother working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet. After using Florence's formula for just 1 week, she received an unexpected tax refund of $8,000 that she had completely forgotten about. James was an unemployed engineer who had been job hunting for 8 months with no success. He started speaking the formula every morning and evening. Within 3 days, he received job offers from 2 different companies, both offering salaries higher than his previous position. Dorothy was drowning in $50,000 of credit card debt and saw no way out. She applied Florence's method with absolute faith. Within 30 days, she won $75,000 in a lottery, enough to pay off all her debts and start fresh. But here's where it gets really extraordinary. Florence taught that this formula doesn't just bring you money, It aligns you with your divine purpose. The money comes through channels that fulfill your soul and contribute to the greater good. It's not just about getting rich, it's about becoming a conduit for divine abundance that blesses everyone around you. Florence identified 7 primary channels through which money flows when you use this formula correctly. Channel 1: Unexpected gifts and windfalls. Channel 2: New business opportunities and partnerships. Channel 3: Salary increases and promotions. Channel 4: Investment returns and passive income. Channel 5: Creative inspirations that generate income. Channel 6: Inheritance and legal settlements. Channel 7: Service opportunities that are highly compensated. The key is to remain open to all channels and not limit how the money can come to you. The universe has infinite ways to deliver your abundance, often through means you never could have imagined. Now, let me address the skeptics in the audience. You might be thinking, this sounds too good to be true. If it really works, why isn't everyone rich? The answer is simple. Most people don't believe they deserve wealth. They speak words of lack instead of abundance. And they give up after a few days instead of persisting with faith. Florence taught that persistence is the key to breakthrough. She said, "The darkest hours just before dawn." Often, just when it seems like nothing is happening, that's when the breakthrough comes. Your job is to keep speaking the formula with unwavering faith, regardless of outer appearances. One of her students, Thomas, spoke the formula faithfully for 40 days with no visible results. On day 41, he was offered a business partnership that eventually made him a millionaire. Later, he discovered that the negotiations for that partnership had begun on day 1, the same day he started using Florence's formula. The universe was working behind the scenes the entire time. Here's something that will revolutionize your understanding of money. Florence taught that money is not material, it's spiritual. Money is crystallized energy, frozen thought, materialized consciousness. When you understand this truth, you realize that creating money is not about manipulation or force. It's about alignment with the infinite abundance that is your divine birthright. Florence distinguished between poverty consciousness and abundance consciousness. Poverty consciousness sees lack everywhere and believes in limitation. Abundance consciousness sees opportunity in every situation and knows that supply is unlimited. To shift from poverty consciousness to abundance consciousness, Florence recommended this daily practice morning. Upon waking, before getting out of bed, speak this declaration. This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. This day brings me perfect abundance in perfect ways. Throughout the day, every time you handle money, whether spending or receiving, say silently, "There's always more where this came from. My supply is endless." Evening. Before sleep, review your day and give thanks for all the abundance you experienced, no matter how small. But here's the most powerful secret of all. Florence discovered that the formula works faster when you use it to help others as well as yourself. When you speak the formula for someone else's financial breakthrough, you create a spiritual circuit that multiplies the abundance flowing to both of you. Florence taught that money must circulate to multiply. Hoarding money stops its flow and actually repels abundance. But when you give generously and freely, you create space for more to flow in. She recommended tithing, giving 10% of your income to spiritual or charitable causes as a way to keep the abundance flowing. One of her students, Elizabeth, was hesitant to tithe because she felt she barely had enough for herself. Florence convinced her to try it for just 1 month. Elizabeth tithed $50 from her $500 monthly income. That same month, she received an unexpected bonus of $800 at work. She never stopped tithing after that, and her income grew consistently year after year. For those ready to take this work to the next level, Florence taught several advanced techniques. The gratitude multiplier, Before speaking the formula, spend 5 minutes giving thanks for money you've already received, no matter how small the amount. Gratitude is the greatest multiplier of abundance. The visualization amplifier. As you speak the formula, visualize golden light surrounding you and flowing through you. See this light attracting money from all directions like a powerful magnet. The affirmation bridge. Create a bridge between where you are now and where you want to be by adding this phrase to the formula. I move from where I am to where I desire to be with ease and grace. Now, let me share something that might shock you about Florence herself. Despite discovering these powerful money manifestation techniques, she chose to live modestly and gave most of her wealth away to help others. Why? Because she understood that true abundance isn't about accumulating possessions, it's about having the freedom to live your purpose and serve others. Based on Florence's observations of thousands of students, here are the most common mistakes that block financial manifestation. Mistake 1. Speaking the formula mechanically without feeling or faith. The words must be charged with emotion and conviction. Mistake 2. Continuing to speak words of lack and limitation throughout the day while expecting the formula to work. Your words must be consistent with your desires. Mistake 3. Becoming impatient and giving up too soon. Divine timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match your human timetable. Mistake 4. Trying to force or control how the money comes, instead of allowing it to flow through unexpected channels. Mistake 5. Using the formula selfishly, without any thought of how your abundance can serve others. Here's something that will amaze you. Florence predicted that in the future, these principles would be validated by science. She said that one day, people would understand that consciousness creates reality, and that thoughts and words have measurable effects on the physical world. Today, quantum physics is proving her right. Modern research in quantum physics shows that consciousness affects reality at the subatomic level. Your thoughts and words create electromagnetic fields that influence the behavior of particles around you. When you speak Florence's formula with faith and emotion, you're literally restructuring the quantum field to align with abundance. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology have proven that positive thoughts and emotions boost immune function and overall health. Similarly, abundance thoughts and emotions create a vibrational frequency that attracts opportunities and resources. Neuroscience research shows that repetitive positive affirmations create new neural pathways in the brain, literally rewiring your mind for success and abundance. But here's what's really incredible. Florence taught that this formula works whether you believe in God or not, whether you understand metaphysics or not, whether you've studied spiritual principles or not. It works because it's based on universal law, and universal law works for everyone regardless of their beliefs or understanding. Florence identified several universal laws that govern manifestation. The law of vibration. Everything in the universe vibrates at a specific frequency. When you align your vibration with abundance, you attract abundance. The law of attraction like attracts like. When you embody the consciousness of wealth, you attract wealth. The law of cause and effect. Every thought and word is a cause that creates an effect. Positive, abundant thoughts create positive, abundant effects. The law of circulation. What you give out comes back multiplied. When you give generously, you receive abundantly. The law of divine order. There is a perfect plan for your life that includes unlimited abundance. When you align with this plan, everything falls into place. Let me share some modern testimonials from people who have used Florence's formula in recent years. Michael from California wrote, "I was skeptical, but desperate. I had lost my job during the pandemic and was facing foreclosure. I used Florence's formula for 30 days straight. On day 31, I was offered a consulting contract worth $75,000. Today, my consulting business is thriving, and I'm earning more than I ever did as an employee. Sarah from New York shared, I had been struggling as a freelance writer, barely making $1,000 a month. After learning Florence's method, I started speaking the formula every morning and evening. Within 2 months, I landed 3 high-paying clients, and my monthly income jumped to $8,000. 6 months later, I'm consistently earning $15,000 a month. David from Texas testified, my construction business was failing, and I was drowning in debt. Florence's formula seemed like a last resort. I spoke it faithfully for 60 days. During that time, I received 3 major contracts that saved my business and put me back in the black. Now I teach this method to all my employees. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Florence taught that the greatest abundance comes not from getting, but from giving. When you use this formula with the intention of becoming a greater blessing to others, the universe moves heaven and earth to support you. Florence believed that everyone has a unique gift to offer the world. And when you align your money manifestation with your divine purpose, the results are miraculous. She taught her students to ask, how can my abundance serve the greater good? How can my wealth be a blessing to others? When you approach money manifestation from this higher perspective, you tap into the infinite resources of the universe. Your abundance becomes unlimited because it's serving an unlimited purpose. Based on Florence's teachings, here's a 30-day plan to multiply your money. Days 1 through 7 cleans your consciousness. Eliminate all negative talk about money. Replace every lack thought with abundance thoughts. Days 8 through 14. Begin speaking the formula twice daily, upon waking and before sleep. Add feeling and emotion to every word. Days 15 through 20. 1. Expand to speaking the formula hourly during waking hours. Start visualizing your desired abundance as already manifested. Days 22 through 20. 8. Add generous giving to your practice. Either donate to causes you believe in, even if it's just a small amount. Days 29 through 30. Live in complete faith and expectation. Act as if your abundance has already arrived. Make plans based on your new reality. Here's the most important thing I can tell you. Florence Scovel Shinn's formula isn't just about money, it's about freedom. Freedom to live your dreams, freedom to help others, freedom to express your highest potential. When you master this formula, you master life itself. Florence promised her students that this formula would transform every area of their lives, not just their finances. Students reported improvements in health, relationships, career satisfaction, and spiritual growth. Money was just the beginning of their total life transformation. Let me tell you about Linda, another one of Florence's students, who exemplifies this total transformation. Linda was not only broke, but also battling depression and a failing marriage. She felt like her entire life was falling apart. When she discovered Florence's formula, she was desperate enough to try anything. She committed to the 30-day plan I just outlined, speaking the formula with complete faith. Despite having no evidence that anything was changing, on day 15, something shifted. Linda noticed she was feeling more optimistic, more energetic. Her husband commented that she seemed different, happier, more confident. On day 23, she received an unexpected call from a former colleague offering her a part-time consulting position. The pay was modest, but it was the first opportunity she'd had in months. By day 30, not only had her financial situation begun to improve, but her marriage was healing. Her depression was lifting, and she felt like she had a future again. But Linda didn't stop there. She continued using the formula, and over the next year, her consulting business grew into a 6-figure enterprise. Her marriage not only survived but became stronger than ever. She lost 30 pounds, started exercising regularly, and discovered a passion for helping other women overcome financial struggles. Today, Linda teaches Florence's principles to thousands of women around the world. and her annual income exceeds what she used to make in 5 years. This is the power of Florence Scovel Shinn's formula. It doesn't just change your bank account, it changes your entire life trajectory. It aligns you with your highest potential and opens doors you never knew existed. Now, let me share with you some additional techniques that Florence taught to her most advanced students. These are the methods that separate the millionaires from those who just get by. The first advanced technique is called the gratitude spiral. Every morning, before speaking the formula, list 10 things you're grateful for related to money. Start with the obvious ones. If you have any money at all, be grateful for it. If you have a job, be grateful for the income. If you have food, shelter, clothing, be grateful that you could afford these necessities. But then dig deeper. Be grateful for the potential money that's coming to you. Be grateful for your ability to earn money. Be grateful for the skills, talents, and knowledge that can generate income. Be grateful for the opportunities that surround you, even if you haven't recognized them yet. As you practice this gratitude, you'll notice that your awareness of abundance begins to expand. You'll start seeing opportunities that were always there, but were invisible to your scarcity, focused mind. The second advanced technique is the wealth declaration. This is a powerful statement that Florence created for students who were ready to claim their millionaire status. Here's the declaration. I am a millionaire in consciousness and manifestation. My thoughts are millionaire thoughts. My actions are millionaire actions. My words are millionaire words. I walk, talk, think, and feel like the millionaire I am. Money flows to me from multiple sources in ever-increasing amounts. I am a magnet for wealth, a channel for abundance, and a blessing to everyone I meet. Florence instructed her students to speak this declaration while looking at themselves in the mirror every morning and evening. She said that the mirror work was crucial because it forces you to confront any self-limiting beliefs that might be lurking in your subconscious. When you can speak these words while looking directly into your own eyes without flinching, without doubt, without that little voice saying, "Who are you kidding?" then you know you've truly embodied the consciousness of wealth. The third advanced technique is the abundance anchor. This involves creating a physical gesture or movement that you associate with abundance. Every time you speak the formula, make this gesture. It could be placing your hand over your heart, raising your arms to the sky, or simply pressing your palms together in prayer position. The key is consistency. Every single time you speak the formula, make the same gesture. What this does is create a neurological anchor between the physical movement and the feeling of abundance. Over time, simply making the gesture will trigger the feeling of wealth, even when you're not speaking the formula. This is incredibly powerful in challenging moments when doubt tries to creep in. One quick gesture can instantly restore your abundant mindset. Florence also taught about what she called the millionaire mindset makeover. This involves examining every area of your life through the lens of abundance rather than scarcity. For example, instead of buying the cheapest option available, ask yourself, what would a millionaire choose? This doesn't mean being reckless with money you don't have, but rather making decisions from an abundant mindset rather than a poverty mindset. A millionaire might choose quality over quantity, investing in items that last rather than constantly replacing cheap alternatives. A millionaire might choose to tip generously, invest in their education, or spend money on experiences that enrich their life. The key is to start thinking and acting like the wealthy person you're becoming, not the financially struggling person you're leaving behind. Florence observed that her most successful students shared certain characteristics. They were all voracious learners, constantly seeking new knowledge and skills that could increase their value in the marketplace. They were generous with their time, money, and expertise, understanding that giving creates a vacuum that the universe must fill. They were persistent, continuing to use the formula, even when results weren't immediately visible. They were grateful, finding reasons to appreciate their current situation, while working toward their desires. And they were service-oriented, always looking for ways to use their abundance to make a positive impact in the world. One of Florence's most successful students was a woman named Catherine, who started with nothing but debt and a dream. Catherine had always wanted to start her own business, but felt trapped by her circumstances. She was a single mother with 2 young children, working 2 part-time jobs just to pay rent. When she discovered Florence's teachings, she was initially skeptical. How could speaking a few words change her desperate situation? But Catherine was desperate enough to try anything. She began speaking the formula every morning, while her children were still asleep, and every evening after they went to bed. She practiced the gratitude spiral, finding things to appreciate, even in her difficult circumstances. She made the wealth declaration while looking in the bathroom mirror, often fighting back tears as she tried to believe the words she was speaking. For the first month, nothing seemed to change externally, but Catherine noticed internal shifts. She felt more hopeful, more creative, more aware of possibilities. In the second month, she had an idea for a service business that could be run from home with minimal startup costs. In the third month, she took action on that idea, using the formula to overcome her fears and self-doubt. Catherine's business grew slowly at first, but steadily. By the end of the first year, she was earning enough to quit one of her part-time jobs. By the end of the second year, she had replaced both jobs and was earning more than she ever had before. By the third year, she had a team of employees and was generating multiple 6 figures annually. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in Catherine's bank account. It was in Catherine herself. She had evolved from a fearful, struggling single mother into a confident, successful entrepreneur who was now teaching other women how to create financial freedom. Her children grew up watching their mother build something from nothing, learning that limitations are largely self-imposed, and that dreams can become reality with the right mindset and consistent action. This is the true power of Florence Scovel Shinn's formula. It's not just about attracting money. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts abundance. It's about transforming your identity from someone who struggles financially to someone who prospers in all areas of life. Florence understood that lasting wealth requires more than just a temporary influx of money. It requires a fundamental shift in consciousness. She taught that there are 3 levels of wealth consciousness: survival consciousness, which focuses on having just enough to get by; comfort consciousness, which focuses on having enough to live comfortably; and abundance consciousness, which focuses on having unlimited supply for unlimited giving. Most people operate from survival consciousness, worried about paying bills and making ends meet. Some reach comfort consciousness, where they have enough for their needs and some wants. But few achieve abundance consciousness, where money is no longer a limitation on their ability to live their purpose and serve others. The formula works at all 3 levels, but its true power is unleashed when you use it to develop abundance consciousness. This means expanding your vision beyond your personal needs to encompass your potential impact on the world. When you speak the formula with the intention of becoming a greater blessing to others, you align with the infinite abundance of the universe itself. Florence taught that abundance consciousness has certain characteristics: infinite thinking rather than limited thinking, possibility focus rather than problem focus, solution orientation rather than circumstance orientation, giving mentality rather than taking mentality, and faith-based decisions rather than fear-based decisions. Let me share one final story that perfectly illustrates the transformative power of Florence's formula. There was a man named William who attended one of Florence's lectures in the 1930s. William was homeless, unemployed, and had been living on the streets for several months after losing everything in the stock market crash. He came to the lecture only because it was free and the venue was warm. William was skeptical of what he heard, but he had nothing left to lose. He began speaking the formula while sleeping in doorways and shelters. He practiced gratitude for the smallest kindnesses: a free meal, a warm place to sit, a stranger's smile. He made the wealth declaration while looking at his reflection in store windows, feeling foolish but persisting anyway. Within 2 weeks, William was offered temporary work loading trucks. He worked harder than anyone else, showing up early and staying late, all while continuing to speak the formula. Within a month, he was offered full-time employment. Within 6 months, he had saved enough money to rent a small apartment. Within a year, he had been promoted to supervisor. But William didn't stop there. He continued using the formula, gradually expanding his vision and his impact. He started his own trucking company, which grew into a fleet of vehicles. He became a major employer in his city, always giving opportunities to people who were down on their luck, just as he had been. By the time of his death in the 1970s, William had created a multi-million-dollar business empire and had given away more money to charity than most people ever earn. The most remarkable part of William's story isn't the money he made, it's the person he became. From a homeless, hopeless man, he transformed into a pillar of his community, a generous philanthropist, and an inspiration to everyone who knew his story. And it all started with a simple formula spoken with faith in the midst of seemingly impossible circumstances. This is what Florence Scovel Shinn's formula can do for you. It can take you from wherever you are right now, whether you're struggling to pay bills, working a job you hate, feeling trapped by circumstances, or simply wanting more abundance in your life, and transform not just your financial situation, but your entire existence. But here's the crucial point: the formula only works if you work it. It's not magic, it's spiritual law. Like any law, it operates consistently and predictably when applied correctly. But application requires commitment, consistency, and faith. You can't speak the formula once and expect miracles. You can't use it half-heartedly and expect full results. You must commit to the process, trust in the outcome, and persist through the inevitable challenges and doubts that will arise. Before I close, let me ask you this: what would your life look like if money was never a problem again? What dreams would you pursue? What impact would you make? What legacy would you leave? Florence Scovel Shinn's formula can make that vision your reality, but only if you take action. Don't let this moment pass. Don't be one of those people who watches this video, gets excited, and then does nothing. Your abundance is waiting for you to claim it. Your destiny is calling for you to step up. Your time is now. Subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already, because I'll be sharing more of Florence's advanced techniques in upcoming videos. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of these life-changing secrets. And most importantly, start using this formula today. Speak it with faith, feel it with your whole being, and watch your financial world transform. Comment below and let me know. What's the first thing you'll do when this formula multiplies your money? I read every comment, and I'm excited to celebrate your success with you. Remember, you're not just learning about money manifestation. You're stepping into your divine inheritance. You're claiming what has always been yours. You're aligning with the abundance that the universe has been trying to give you all along. This is your moment. This is your formula. This is your breakthrough. Use it wisely, use it faithfully, and watch miracles unfold in your life. The wealth you desire is not just possible, it's inevitable when you apply Florence Scovel Shinn's secret formula with unwavering faith. Your abundant future starts now.